There have long been stories and legends of people being abducted by aliens.
Car? Why are you stopping the car?
Hell, it's Siren
Don't tell me that the car's broken.
Most of us like to dismiss these as delusions and fantasies.
And if you think that I'm gonna marry you,
But is it possible such a thing could really happen?
I think I can get it going.
Tonight we travel to the furthest shores of scientific inquiry to try and discover how and why aliens might indeed be visiting us here on Earth. Prepare yourself for 10 ways to be abducted by an alien.
Whoa. Hey, Mary, I told you I'd get... Hey, Mary Lou. Mary Lou! Mary Lou!
Welcome, friends of the far side, to our out-of-this-world guide to alien abduction. Roswell, 1947. Local residents claim to have witnessed a flying saucer crash to Earth, leaving its lifeless passengers in the clutches of U.S. government scientists. Since those fateful events, sightings of UFOs have become ever more frequent and disturbing. According to one opinion poll, up to 80% of Americans believe their government is covering up evidence of extraterrestrial contact. More worrying still, the 2002 Roper poll found that an astonishing 2.9 million Americans reported symptoms, which researchers associate with alien abduction. The legends are legion, from spaceships to space cadets. This program puts their claims to the test. We will meet some alleged abductees, reconstruct their amazing stories, and get a second opinion from some of the world's leading scientists. So come with us now on a journey to the furthest shores of scientific understanding as we kick off with a deceptively simple first step.
To me, there was never any question that there would be life out there, even intelligent life. But of course, that's personal opinion. I have to say that, in recent years, the indications seem to be more and more favorable that there's life out there. We're finding planets around other stars. So, the amount of real estate that might support some biology seems to be growing. And this sort of vindicates the thought that, well, maybe we're not all that special.
With so many stars to choose from, it's hard to know where intelligent life might be hiding. Taking up the challenge of finding it is Seth Shostak, senior astronomer with SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
One question that SETI researchers always have is, where to point their antennas. Where in the sky should we be listening? And we've taken a fairly conservative approach so far. We say, look, let's look in the direction of sun-like stars, stars like our own sun. Of course we're looking for a needle in a haystack, and we know how big the haystack is, by the way. That's the size of the galaxy. What we don't know is how many needles there are.
Even if we were to detect a signal, would we understand it?
Who knows what they're broadcasting? Could be used car ads, or who knows? But the kind of signal that we're looking for, that makes sense. And it would be the unmistakable sign of a transmitter.
But suppose we actually received a signal from another world. How would we reply? Obviously, the aliens aren't going to speak English like they do in the movies, so how would we communicate? Some scientists have devised languages based on mathematics, some based on patterns, and others still on pictures. Seth, however, favors a different approach.
My personal preference is to just take the servers down at Google, for example, and send them the internet. And that gives them everything they'll probably want to know about us, I would think.
But not everyone is happy with the idea of betraying our presence to alien races. What happens if the aliens aren't content to sit around Google whacking? What if the aliens have a more sinister intent?
We don't know what's out there, and it could be that betraying where we are, our presence here on Earth, might lead to, shall we say, unfortunate consequences.
Unfortunate consequences? I don't think that's a laughing matter, Seth. The bad news is, mankind has already started broadcasting to any alien who cares to listen.
Television transmitters actually produce signals that go out, well, they go out forever, of course. They just get weaker with distance. And because there are television transmitters all around the globe, there's always a signal being broadcast. Television transmitters often have power of a couple of 100,000 watts. They're pretty strong transmitters. They're high-frequency transmitters, or high up on the dial, which means that those signals, they go off toward the suburbs, then they scoot right past the suburbs, and they go out into space. So those signals have spread the news that humans are here out 50 or 60 light years, and within that distance, there are several thousand star systems.
So, it seems a foregone conclusion that aliens have discovered us, even if we are still looking for them. When trying to be abducted by an alien, it's important to learn the lessons of history. So now we turn to the first reported case of alien abduction, the extraordinary story of two ordinary Americans, Betty and Barney Hill. Date is September the 15th, 1961. Betty and Barney Hill, a New Hampshire couple, are returning from vacation in Canada along US Route 3. At around 10:15 p.m., Barney notices what appears to be an erratically moving star. Bemused, Barney decides to stop the car in order to take a closer look. Suddenly, the glowing object flies to within 100 yards, and to his disbelief and amazement, he sees the occupants inside. Terrified, he runs back to his car, and the couple speed away. Later, under hypnosis, the Hills independently tell exactly the same story of how their car had stalled. The craft had landed, and they had been taken aboard by small, grey aliens. The couple were subjected to an examination. Skin, hair, and nail samples were all taken. The aliens were said to be particularly surprised to discover that Barney's false teeth could be removed and replaced. Later, when Betty asked where her abductors were from, she was shown a star map, indicating they originated from Zeta Reticuli, a pair of faint stars 220 trillion miles away. Could aliens really have traveled across such vastness of space? In theory, yes. One of the world's leading theoretical physicists not only believes aliens are out there, he thinks he knows how they might get around.
I think it's almost a foregone conclusion that they're out there. Take a look at our galaxy. There are 100 billion stars in our galaxy. Now take a look at the galaxies of the universe. We can actually count them. In the visible universe, our telescopes have the range to see 100 billion galaxies. Well, how many stars are there in the visible universe? Count them. 100 billion times 100 billion. That is an astronomical number. You have to be supremely arrogant to believe that we are the only ones in town.
But that's just the visible universe. According to Michio, intelligent life might also exist in other dimensions. He calls this concept of extra-dimensional space string theory.
In string theory, we are forced to confront the idea of other dimensions. It is the only theory which has been able to unify all the laws of physics into a single coherent whole.
String theory proposes the existence of 11 extra dimensions. This might seem crazy, but apparently it allows physicists to make sense of the chaotic universe we live in.
From the top of the Empire State Building, I look down and I see the chaos of the streets, but I see it whole. I can see a unity, a coherence that you cannot see on the hustle and bustle of the street below.
So is it really possible alien life exists in some kind of parallel universe? And even if it did, how could they travel to our world?
Well, think about life in the universe. Scientists say the universe is so big, no one is ever going to be able to reach the Earth from the distant stars. There's an ultimate speed limit. You cannot go faster than the speed of light. However, Albert Einstein introduced the concept of wormholes.
Wormholes? No, not the mound of earth messing your lawn, but rather strange doorways between different dimensions. And to travel through one, you have to fly into a black hole.
There is a theory that says that when things fall into a black hole, they get blown out the other end. The other end of a black hole is a white hole where matter spews out.
If this theory is right, it could be that black holes are a link between a vast number of other universes.
Think of a soap bubble. We live on the skin of a soap bubble that's expanding. But if you vibrate the soap bubble, it buds. It sprouts a baby soap bubble. And all of a sudden, you have two soap bubbles. So we do think that perhaps our universe coexists with other soap bubbles, perhaps connected by black holes. And there's not a universe, but a multiverse of universes.
Aliens? From parallel universes? Here on Earth? Could it be there's been a cover-up? Welcome to the X Conference. These people are gathered here in Washington, D.C. to debate the implications of the alien presence. Conference organizer Stephen Bassett believes that as the pressure mounts, governments of the world will be forced to come clean and admit there's been a cosmic cover-up.
All of the first world nations know about the ET presence. So these governments could do a disclosure event anytime they wanted to. Disclosure is nothing more than the acknowledgement of the extraterrestrial presence by the governments of the world to the people under which they have a social contract. That's it. It can happen in about 5 minutes.
But which mysterious government agency is responsible for this cover-up? Many suspect that UFO witnesses may have been intimidated into silence by sinister undercover government agents known as the Men in Black. These are not the familiar comic book and film characters, but allegedly real agents who first appeared in 1953 when they visited one Albert K. Bender. After flashing some unidentifiable ID, they explained the reason for their visit. They knew Bender had discovered the truth about UFOs, and they were there to make sure he kept quiet.
Where are you from?
Us tell everything.
What are you doing with my toilet roll?
But their methods were most peculiar. They apparently expressed amazement at mundane objects, such as ballpoint pens. One is even said to have drunk a bowl of hair gel. Bender said he couldn't decide whether his sinister visitors were CIA agents, or whether they too were aliens. Either way, they were pretty weird, with eyes that lit up and the ability to float around the room. Was Bender deluded? According to one opinion poll, more than 50% of Americans also believe UFOs exist. And even more believe the government is concealing the truth about them.
Here's a simple question to ask every person. Did you come into this world as a sentient being to live your life in a closet with a blanket over your head, cowering, not even wanting to know the truth because, well, it's too terrible? If that Borg are coming, let's take them on.
If we do encounter some extraterrestrials, will they come in peace, armed only with a big pipe organ and a nice light show? Or will their intentions be more sinister?
In the films, whenever we encounter extraterrestrials, they're always more or less at about our level, but the facts are that if we do pick up a signal from another world, it's going to be coming from a society that's far beyond our own. So if we find them, we're finding somebody that's at least thousands of years beyond us. I personally would not regard that as a particularly good sign, and that's simply an historical analog with, you know, you're living on some South Sea island and Captain Cook sails into your bay. He's not there on a malicious mission, but it's going to, at the very least, completely change your culture. So having visitors from a more advanced civilization is usually not so good for the beings being visited.
Cripes. So it seems the big bad Borg might well be coming. Don't panic. We're not completely defenseless. Time to travel to the west coast of America to meet a man who is fighting back.
I'm Michael Mencken. I'm the inventor of the anti-alien flat screen helmet.
Michael Mencken has become so concerned by the threat of alien abduction that he has decided to do something about it. Whilst reading a science fiction story, Michael realized aliens must be able to control people telepathically by using microwave energy. He quickly set to work designing a shield to protect abductees.
Cheers.
And he now spends all his spare time making alien protection helmets.
It's good. Yeah, well, this has got a leather strap, you know. People sleep with it. The leather is comfortable to sleep with, and that's one of the reasons I make the leather. But there are people who have been sleeping with this hat on for years. The only drawback about the hats is they are hot in the summer. And I had a man in Iowa, and he reported that it was too hot in the summers in Iowa to wear it. I said, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to be taken.
Many abductees have reported being subjected to a kind of mind scan procedure whilst on board flying saucers, which they claim allows the aliens to communicate telepathically. Michael Mencken believes they do this by using microwaves, a type of electromagnetic wave more commonly used to heat food.
Food contains a lot of water, and it's the water molecules that vibrate in sympathy with the electromagnetic fields. And as the molecules vibrate, then you get friction, and that friction causes heating.
The principle of the thought screen helmet is to shield the brain from these microwaves.
In order to stop an electromagnetic wave from penetrating, you do have to have a sheet of metal. And as the frequency goes up, that sheet of metal can get thinner and thinner, which is why we can use tin foil to act as a good screen for microwave radiation.
Although there is no scientific evidence that microwaves can be used for telepathic communication, Michael Mencken hopes that by lining his hats with electrostatic shielding, he can prevent the aliens from entering their victims' minds. Michael has designed his abduction hats in a range of fetching styles for every occasion. But there have been problems.
The person who was overcome said that her head got very hot, uncomfortably hot. She thought it was going to burn. So evidently they just turned up the energy. But in electronic warfare, my response is just to make more shielding.
Needless to say, the aliens are furious and seem to be doing everything they can to neutralize the effect of Michael's helmets.
The aliens have tried to take hats off. So I tell people to secure the hat with tape or string. I have, I don't know, about 10 people who put tape on every night and sleep with it every night.
Michael continues to use his spare time to make hats for nothing and supplies them to vulnerable humans around the world. Next, we examine an altogether more esoteric method to make alien contact. Members of a group calling themselves the Etheria Society are gathering here on Holston Down in North Devon in England to tap into spiritual energy they believe is flowing to Earth from outer space.
The great message, if you like, of the Etheria Society is that there's one crisis in the world, and that's the spiritual energy crisis. If we solve that one, all the others will be solved, because then karmic balance will come to the planet. One of the ways of doing that is to go to charged mountains, and we perform a combination of the 12 blessings, which is a mystical practice given to us by the Master Jesus, who we believe came from another world, together with mantra, which is an Eastern chanting method, which invokes this spiritual energy.
They believe their founder, a taxi driver from Maida Vale called His Eminence Sir George King, was in regular contact with higher intelligences from outer space for most of his adult life.
In 1954, on May the 8th, Dr. King was in his flat, small bedsit really, in Maida Vale in London, and he was actually washing up at the time, and he received an audible command. It's called the command.
George takes up the story.
I was performing a tricky feat at the time, trying to dry 4 plates by shuffling them about, rather in the same way that one shuffles a pack of cards. May I warn any independent bachelor that such a procedure, when you consider the frequent breakages, costs almost as much as a wife.
As George juggled the crockery, the sound of the street below suddenly stopped, and an alien sound struck his ear with gentle firmness.
You are to become the voice of interplanetary parliament.
The ensuing silence was broken only by the sound of shattering plates as they slipped from his useless fingers. There was no further explanation which George desperately required, having never heard of interplanetary parliament. A week of hopeless frustration followed. Those he confided in were baffled. He almost wept with terrible loneliness. But he was not afraid. George knew that prophets often experience a period of angst and loneliness before a great revelation. 8 days later, after very careful practice of yogic breathing, a man in white robes walked through the wall and, having outlined George's earthly mission, promptly exited through the locked door.
From there, he became a medium for various intelligences from other planets.
I am known as Ethereus.
Where are you speaking from now?
I am sorry, my dear friend, I cannot answer that question for you.
He made quite a few unconventional claims. He said, well, Jesus comes from another planet. That wasn't going to go down too well. But he didn't let that stop him.
George founded the Aetherius Society in London in 1955 before moving to America. He set about constructing various devices to store and broadcast spiritual energy.
We have a piece of equipment called a battery. And in this battery, which is a piece of radionic apparatus, that's the science of psychic energy, we believe we can store energy and then released in cooperation with otherworldly beings to particular areas.
This transmission of spiritual energy is achieved with the Spiritual Energy Radiator, a mysterious device which also apparently receives energy from a giant invisible spacecraft, 12,000 yards long.
This particular spacecraft, satellite number 3 as we call it, is manned and is piloted by interplanetary beings, but there's nothing unusual in that. Of course there are people out there who think it's all absolutely nutty and weird, but there are a lot of people who say, well, that could be true.
And so we leave the members of the Aetherius Society to their sacred cosmic chants. And it's time now to propose a more practical method to contact alien beings. UFO witnesses have often commented upon the mysterious way in which these machines appear to hover in space. For some reason, members of the police force are particularly prone to seeing UFOs and have given us reports like this one.
I was driving a police car at the time when I came across what I now describe as a UFO. It was hovering off the ground about 5 feet, and it was frightening, very frightening.
Making a quick sketch, he was then astonished to find himself further down the road than he should have been. Later, under hypnosis, the said police officer recalled being taken aboard the spacecraft, where he was placed on a table and examined by a group of small beings with heads shaped like lamps, overseen by a taller being in biblical clothing, said the PC.
It's not easy being a policeman, but when it's a policeman who saw a UFO, it's even worse.
Just how could a UFO hover off the ground? Clearly, aliens must have mastered some form of anti-gravity technology. While this may sound the stuff of science fiction, in a suburban Seattle garage, one man is trying to get anti-gravity off the ground.
The thing that we have to look forward to as the human race, once we finally conquer true anti-gravity technology, is that we will be able to lift tons more weight than we ever expected. Not only will it will work on such a profound level that no one will even envision the aircraft that we use today.
This so-called lifter is made of aluminium and other lightweight materials and uses a power supply of 50,000 volts. Consequently, it requires a little care as it is powered up. But can this identified flying object actually levitate?
The plus side of the lifter is that it works, it flies. And despite the criticism about how it's flying, it nonetheless will hang there in the air and annoy scientists to no end.
This lifter works by creating a so-called field effect. Air is ionized by the electric field between the thin wire and the foil. The attraction and repulsion of these charged ions creates a flow of wind, creating thrust, similar to how an aircraft wing creates lift by displacing air. But is this ion wind true anti-gravity? In other words, does it actually reduce or negate the effects of gravity?
The question becomes, does ion wind change the properties of space-time? It would make sense. The particles are traveling at very high speeds. So we've got several effects going on that we haven't really even tried to measure yet.
If UFOs existed, how would they work? And how would you design such a craft that could pull a 45G turn and not crush the occupants?
The problem with flying at the speeds UFO witnesses report is that they would crush any human pilot into jam.
We are reaching the limits of human pilots. Anti-gravity can change that. I think anti-gravity can change the inertia within the cockpit. I look at anti-gravity research, unfortunately, as the modern equivalent of scientific pornography. It's something that no one wants to talk about, because every time they do, they're maligned as being some kind of deviant.
Sadly, there we must leave Tim in his garage to continue carrying out unnatural acts with high-voltage equipment. Okay, now we've discovered how they might have got here, we look next at why some people are selected for abduction and others cruelly ignored. Poor Alfred Bertu was one of the few people to have suffered the indignity of being abducted and then rejected. In August 1983, Bertu, who was 77 at the time, was fishing in a canal in Aldershot when a bright light descended close by the towpath. Two aliens emerged and escorted him into the huge spinning craft. After a cursory examination, they told him he was too old and infirm and asked him to leave. But here in the Swiss Alps, on the other hand, we meet next with Billy Meyer, a one-armed peasant farmer who is flavor of the month with the intergalactic jet set. Here at his specially built center, he lives with a small group of people who believe Billy has been specially selected for contact by a race of aliens called the Pleiarans.
Most of the time they meet me in my office. They are not superhuman beings or something like this. They are normal human beings like you and I. Just now it's each week, each Thursday. We work together to correct the contact notes.
Billy keeps a numbered record of his contacts in which the Pleiarans tell him about possible future events on Earth.
All of them, they know German. And some of them, they learned in the meantime Swiss German.
It's now over 30 years since Billy's first contact.
I was sitting in my office and I got something like a voice in my head on a telepathic way. And there was the order in it to go out with my bicycle and the photo camera to watch the sky. And half an hour later, I heard whirring sounds. And then came a small beam ship out of the clouds. They don't fly a normal way, they beam. Short distances they fly, and the large distances they beam.
Since the 1970s, Billy has amassed hundreds of photographs of the Pleiaran beam ships and also shot hours of cinefilm, which his supporters claim has been analyzed by experts and proven to be genuine. Sadly, the beam ships and their occupants use a cloaking device to remain hidden to everyone except Billy.
If they get in contact with other Earth people, they will turn crazy.
Fair enough. I sometimes feel that way too. But aliens beaming in from other worlds sounds a bit kooky. But according to some leading physicists, teleportation is within the laws of physics.
It used to be thought that teleportation was nothing but hogwash. When people say, "Beam me up, Scotty," people snicker and laugh. Well, we physicists are not laughing anymore. It is possible to teleport things in the laboratory. We have now successfully teleported photons and now individual atoms. And in a few more years, the first molecules will be teleported, and perhaps in a decade or so, the first virus will be teleported. And remember that Star Trek takes place 300 years into the future, which is sufficient time for us to learn how to teleport Captain Kirk in a laboratory.
When Betty and Barney Hill were abducted, the details of their experience were only discovered through the use of hypnotic regression. Next, we learn more about this controversial technique and hear one man's harrowing tale of alien surgical intervention. A suburban North London house. Trevor Wooding and his scientist friend Lars have come to visit hypnotherapist David Howard. Through hypnotic regression, he is helping Trevor to uncover bizarre memories of his abduction experience.
There's two things I do when I'm regressing people. Now, the obvious thing is that you want people to remember things they've forgotten, but then you can actually get the person to get the aliens to talk through them as well if you're lucky. So when you've got all the memories back, you then say, can we have a dialogue with the aliens? And Trevor is the most fluent one I've had so far.
It was whilst watching television that Trevor first realised he was not normal.
When I was at home about 3 or 4 years previously, there'd been an American series Taken that had been shown on TV. And there was the typical things that happen to an abductee, nosebleeds, scars on the body, particularly on the ankles and knees. And I got one of these ankle scars, and I suddenly thought, well, wait a minute, this has happened to me. I've been abducted.
David begins the regression session, and within seconds, Trevor descends into a deep hypnotic state.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Deep sleep, Trevor.
Within minutes, he starts to recall details of his abduction experience.
The first time I saw the craft was in the college car park at Gravesend. I'd ordered a curry and I was just sitting down to eat it. I think I ate 3/4 of it. And I looked up and there was this light formation coming towards me. And got closer and closer. And the next minute I was being lifted up into the craft on a cradle of light. These Bombay doors opened on the craft. And this projector-like device drew me up and dropped me onto like a stretcher. About 3.5 foot tall. They've got insect-like heads, but they were basically humanoid in shape. They seem to have these enormous sunglass-type shields over their eyes. Something was implanted in my nose. It did cause an enormous amount of stress at the time, because the prong was at least 1 foot long. They put a chip into the brain so that they can actually trace the abductees. But I'd rather not go further into that one. It's very, very distressing.
Trevor then attempted telepathic communication with the aliens, causing their craft to veer dangerously out of control. Having nearly crashed their precious flying saucer, the aliens decided they'd had enough of Trevor.
Somehow I was manoeuvred back onto the cradle of light. They cut open the side of the car, they dropped me back into the driver's seat, and then re-welded the car back up, with 3/4 eaten curry back on my lap, which I finished off. I was hungry, so I finished the curry.
Finally, David decides to bring Trevor back to the real world.
Thank you for being noted, David. Our greetings goes to everyone on Earth, and we hope that this will be a productive encounter for everyone concerned. I'm back. I'm back.
What does David think of the results?
Now, whether they're actually inventing it or not, you can't prove.
Or can you? What about the implant lodged in Trevor's brain?
I blew my nose and it came out in a handkerchief. It was a tiny little metallic electronic chip of some sort. It was in the middle of the product of my nose, so I didn't particularly want to prod around in it. And my natural reaction was to throw it down the toilet. I actually threw probably about £1 million worth of technology away.
But one question which continues to perplex many believers in the abduction phenomenon is just why the aliens come here. Is it the weather? Or are they just passing by? Or is there some sinister purpose to their visits? Get ready for one disturbing but popular theory. On October the 16th, 1957, Antonio Villas-Boas was ploughing the fields on his family farm in Brazil when the engine of his tractor suddenly cut out. A luminous, egg-shaped giant spaceship with purple lights descended from the sky and landed. He tried to escape on his tractor, but humanoids emerged and took him onto the craft. He was left in a chamber furnished with only a sofa for what seemed an age before a beautiful fair-haired woman arrived. She was naked. He was instantly attracted to her. Antonio described how, without speaking or kissing, they made love. Twice. Antonio went on to become a successful lawyer. Curious though this story is, it was just the first of a number of alien sex reports. One of the difficulties facing researchers into the abduction phenomenon is developing a scientifically sound methodology. Taking up this challenge is Dr. David Jacobs. Over the past 30 years, Dr. Jacobs has worked with hundreds of alien abductees, often using hypnotic regression to uncover hidden memories. He then collates the results.
There's implants, tissue samples, surgical procedures, staring procedures, neurological engagement procedures, gynecological procedures. And if they say something enough times that I realize this is happening, I will eventually add it to this list.
His data has led him to the startling conclusion that the aliens are using humans to breed hybrids with a view to taking over the planet.
One of the things that people began to talk about a few years ago was an increased amount of hybrid activity, often reproductive in nature. And they've been doing this with increased frequency, to my sort of consternation and to the consternation of the people who are describing this.
What David has discovered is that there appears to be a pattern to the aliens' behavior. Sperm samples are regularly taken from male abductees. But for what purpose? More sinister still are the experiences of female abductees.
Hybrids mate with you, and sometimes they, they'll put in a fetus. They'd even harvest the eggs when I was just a little girl. I was pregnant and everything was going fine. 10 weeks after, it's gone. And I called my mother and she said, collect everything that you can and take it to the doctor. And when I got there, they tested it and they said there were fetal cells, but where was the baby?
They are here for a reason. They are working towards a goal. Not only that, but they are doing this secretly, all of which makes me very uneasy.
It seems the aliens may be removing these hybrid toddlers and placing them in vast incubators on board their craft. But why?
All I know is that they're making copies of us. They're training them to act like us.
This does appear to be an integration program. As an academic, I'm forced to follow the evidence, and that's where it leads me, even though I understand how crazy it is, and I'm embarrassed to talk about it in public. And I know that every time I say anything about this, it only redounds against me.
As David acknowledges, many people find his explanation of the abduction phenomenon far-fetched. But what if he is right? What if aliens are being driven to conquer new worlds?
Civilizations facing the ultimate death of the universe, the Big Freeze, may be forced to visit our universe where it's much warmer. That is consistent, believe it or not, with the known laws of physics.
And to an advanced alien species, we must appear crude primitives.
When you walk down a country road and you see an anthill, do you go down to the ants and say, I bring you trinkets, I bring you beads, I bring you nuclear energy, I bring you DNA technology, take me to your leader? Or do you simply step on a few of them? Just remember that the distance between ants and us is comparable to the distance between us and a galactic civilization that can roam the space lanes of the Milky Way galaxy.
Welcome for the grand climax of tonight's 10 Ways to be Abducted by an Alien. Before we discover our abduction chart topper, let's remind ourselves of the story so far. At number 10, we sent a signal to Mars. At number 9, we explored a spooky parallel universe, dark and mysterious at 8, were the bizarre men in black. At 7, it was Michael Mencken and his Fetching Thoughts green helmet. And at 6, His Eminence George King and the Aetherius Society. Hovering at 5 was an anti-gravity device. At 4, we learned how to teleport. Number 3 was Trevor's nasal implant and counter. And at 2 was the Alien Hybrid Program. But topping tonight's Out of This World chart, we bring you to our final extraordinary recommendation in our quest for 10 ways to be abducted by an alien. Number 1. Meet Dennis Crenshaw. Unlike most UFO believers, Dennis has come to the conclusion that flying saucers don't originate from outer space at all. He believes their origin may be altogether closer to home.
Like everybody else, I started reading books on UFOs, and I began to believe, just like everybody else, they were from outer space. But what I found was that government, using news reports and sci-fi movies in the 50s, put that in our mind. I said, wait a minute, how come we're not finding anything all this time? They're always seen in Earth's atmosphere. They're never seen in outer space. So if UFOs aren't from outer space and they are from Earth, they have to be from a place where we can't see their bases. And I read some old books from the 40s, and there were suggestions that they came from a place called the Hollow Earth. Of course, I found that to be totally ridiculous.
The idea that the Earth might be hollow has long been popular in science fiction, but some people believe it's really true. According to the theory, our planet contains at its core a central sun. But before you dismiss this idea as completely bonkers, there is in fact some evidence that the Earth's core may rotate at a different speed to the mantle, behaving not unlike a separate sphere.
The outer core of the Earth is molten iron. In that outer core is a ball of solid iron. And it looks like the coupling of the forces of the liquid exerted torque on the inner core of the Earth. And various models have predicted that that inner core might super-rotate, be a little faster than the rest of the planet.
Sadly, geophysicists can find no evidence that the Earth is hollow, but this has done little to dissuade hollow Earth believers who claim this mysterious inner world can be accessed via 2 openings at the poles. Indeed, dramatic photographs taken in the 1950s do appear to show something resembling holes. And it is from these that some people believe UFOs emerge. But who could be building such craft?
I went back and restudied the hollow Earth belief, and what I found is that the Nazis were far ahead of anybody else on rocket propulsion, on jet engines, and there's the belief that some of them escaped in German submarines to the South Pole into the hollow Earth. So some believe that the Nazis are the ones who have brought us the UFO.
Could it really be the Nazis are responsible for flying saucers? According to this bold theory, Adolf Hitler gave the Allies the slip from his Berlin bunker, went into hiding underground, and built a vast UFO construction site. Although there is no proof the Nazis were working on a saucer-shaped vehicle, their scientists were certainly the first to develop rocket-propelled missiles. Of course, by now, Hitler would be very old indeed, and no doubt the past 60-odd years interred deep underground, while allowing him time to refine his painting, would surely have further disturbed his warped mind. It also seems quite probable that he would have cloned himself as part of a high-tech master race breeding program. This would certainly explain the often reported Aryan appearance of many UFO pilots. So there we have it. Having resolved the flying saucer enigma through the ruthless application of logic and a little lateral thinking, we leave Dennis alone in the dark to have a think about things. We like Dennis, but it seemed for the best.